Do you know what your future holds? Would you like to? Or maybe you'd like some advice on a critical decision. Perhaps you would ask a friend. Perhaps you would ask a parent. Perhaps you would ask powers beyond your control, which do not have an agenda. If you're deciding whether to commit to a certain romantic prospect, you could consult your loved ones, but your loved ones may have some biases. They may not like the person you're seeing, for example. And so you may seek other opinions. And that's where the practice of divination could come in. The querent could be asking about a whole range of things, from matters of the heart, to matters of the state, to matters of lost objects. There are some cultures where the court prophet or diviner would have been a major political position. And sometimes it's not just an ancient culture where that is the case. The Reagan administration in the US routinely consulted astrologers before making major political decisions. Joan Quigley, out of San Francisco, was one of the main ones consulted. According to Nancy Reagan's own memoir, she turned to Quigley after an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, the president. Quote, "Very few people can understand what it's like to have your husband shot at and almost die, and then have him exposed all the time to enormous crowds, any one of whom may be a lunatic with a gun. I was doing everything I could think of to protect my husband and keep him alive." End quote. I can't say I would not act the same way after a possibly traumatic event. But then Reagan would request horoscopes for everything from the best time for the gubernatorial inauguration to when to bomb other countries. The practice of divination varies across time and region. Sometimes, like with the Reagans, it can have a global impact. But this episode is an overview of different types of divination practices and some brief histories therein. I will not be able to cover everything tonight. There are a few different ways and myths around trying to divine one's fortune. I could easily make this a series. This could also unintentionally be called the tarot episode, since that's the longest part of this script. But if you have any questions or requests for later coverages of divination practices, send an email. Welcome to the Dreary Midnight Podcast. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, they. Let's dive in. Before we get too far in, it's time for some terminology. When I say querent, I'm referring to the person who's asking the question about the future. The seer, or the diviner, is the one doing the divination. The first method I'll be talking about tonight is tea leaves. It's called tasiography. Nowadays, we have the option to use tea bags to make tea, but loose leaf tea can be used as a form of divination. The method is simple enough. The querent should consume most of the tea, leaving only the leaves and a small bit of water behind. The querent swirls the cup 3 times, and then, focusing on the question at hand, drains the cup and turns the cup over onto the saucer. Once the leaves have dried, the seer removes the cup and divines the answer to the question based on the shapes of the tea leaves which remain. The rim of the cup represents the present, the sides are the near future, and the bottom is the distant future. One may see a letter E, symbolizing an exit, or perhaps symbolizing a bird. That same shape could symbolize fire, or water, or simply the number 3, depending on the direction of the tea leaves and of the cup. Tea leaf reading, as the Europeans understand it, began when the English started to trade with China, including the trade of tea. There are some origins of the practice in Asia and in the Mediterranean. But tasiography, as Europeans know it, started with the Chinese trade in the 17th century. Before the reading of tea leaves, Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cultures conducted a similar practice with coffee grounds. The method of preparing Turkish coffee, or Greek coffee, depending on what part of the Mediterranean you're in, it's one of the oldest methods of coffee preparation, dating back to the 1500s, the 16th century. It is prepared unfiltered with the grounds in the pot and sugar added when the coffee is being prepared rather than in the cup once the coffee is served. The coffee itself is poured into a cup a little larger than that for espresso, still with the grounds in. Once the coffee is consumed, the divination method is nearly identical to reading tea leaves. Make a wish as you take the last sip, swirl the cup 3 times, then flip the cup onto the saucer, let it dry, and turn the cup back over to see the future, based on what remains. When removing a cup from the saucer, if a big chunk of grounds falls out, it means that the querent troubles will leave them soon. If the cup and saucer are tight and can be lifted up as one unit, that's called a prophet's cup. With the prophet's cup, one does not need to continue the reading because everything asked will come true, but people still go along anyway. I've seen this performed precisely one time while visiting Istanbul. I was staying with a host family, and a friend of mine wanted her coffee grounds read. What I did not know until that moment, and presumably neither did she, is that the person who flips the cup off of the saucer is the person who does the interpretation. Not knowing this, she flipped the cup over and then asked about reading the grounds. Of course, she had no idea what to look for, but she was still guided anyway. But still, her future might have been a little murky. Of course, tea leaf reading is a strictly indoor form of divination. If you want to go outside, there is the Japanese custom of tsujiura. If you have a question you need answered, you go to a crossroads. You take a comb and a face covering, for your eyes, not your mouth. When you reach the crossroads, you make the comb speak 3 times by running your finger along the tines. Then, 3 times, you say, Tsujiura, grant me a true response. And you wait, and you're patient, and you're watchful. If nobody approaches, the ritual has failed. Try again another day. If someone you know approaches, the ritual has failed. Try again another day. If a stranger approaches, the ritual has succeeded. Cover your eyes and wait for the stranger to approach. Do not remove the covering until you're sure you're safe and the ritual is complete. When the stranger is in earshot, ask politely if they will tell your fortune. Be polite, do not demand. If the stranger says nothing, let them walk on. If the stranger says no, let them walk on. When you're sure you're safe, remove the covering and wait for another stranger. But if this stranger says yes, listen carefully to what they have to say. Pay close attention. When the stranger is done, thank them politely and let them walk on. Do not remove the face covering until you're sure you're safe. The ritual is complete. You know something about your fortune. And remember what you learned. Hopefully, you're comfortable with your new knowledge. I really hope it was worth it. I really, truly do. And now, let's return indoors to cartomancy. Cartomancy itself dates back to at least the 14th century in Europe. The most common type of cartomancy, you've probably heard of it. It's called tarot. Tarot decks, as such, started in the 15th century as a regular set of playing cards to play regular card games like Italian tarocchi, which I hear is similar to bridge, at least at the point system. There is a whole family of card games that fall under the tarot game umbrella and have nothing to do with cartomancy. There was just nothing else to do in 1430 whatever. There are a few styles of tarot card games. Back in the 1400s, the broad regional ones were German, Italian, and French. French tarot, well, I looked at the rules and I had no patience for the point system. Initially, tarot games used the same deck, or at least similar decks, as the decks used for cartomancy. In the late Middle Ages in Europe, you're using cards that are highly decorated regardless of what you're using the cards for. They're not your gift shop card deck, they're fancy. Because, well, it's the 15th century, the printing press was literally just invented, publishing hasn't really been mechanized yet, so everything was an art. Because if you're going to put that much effort into writing things out, you might as well make it look pretty in the meantime. The most reproduction you're going to get, at least for cards, is by using woodcuts. That's how the Marseille deck was initially illustrated and distributed in the 14th and 15th century, by using woodcuts. Of the 3 main tarot decks in use today, the Marseille deck is the one that looks most like a regular deck of playing cards. It's still super stylized, but instead of having illustrations of scenes, it still prioritizes being able to count the number of swords or wands on the card rather than having the illustrated scene. Decks specifically for cartomancy were not popularized until the 1780s with a French guy who called himself Attilia. He claimed there was a connection between tarot cards and the god Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, the creator mythologically of hieroglyphics. Attilia claimed there was a book of Thoth written by ancient writers and imparted the knowledge of cartomancy. I'm pretty sure it was Attilia. Attilia probably wrote the book. He claimed Romani and Egyptian folks dispersed the decks and the practice of tarot in Europe long before he was born. The only certain part of that statement is that cartomancy is centuries older than this one French guy. As far as I can tell, Attilia was mostly making up the Egypt connection, but the connection stuck. Just to be clear, that's not uncommon for the time period. Gothic literature, it was invented under a similar pretext. The first Gothic novel, which is called The Castle of Otranto, is framed as, we found this book in this Gothic era castle, and we've translated it from Middle English. The author in the 1720s wrote it. It was purely written by the author in the 1720s. No Gothic connection, but the name stuck. But in both of these situations, it's almost an attempt to add ancient authority to something that did not already have it. But we still use fancy-themed decks today. As alluded to, there's the Marseille deck, but the other 2 common ones are the Thoth deck and the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Frequently, it's just called the Rider deck or the Waite deck or the Rider-Waite deck. I have a deck that is a reproduction of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It was initially released in 1909 by the Rider Company. The symbolism was outlined by A.E. White and illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith. This deck is rooted in European ideas of elements and astrology and has a lot of Christian symbolism and influence. For example, for a while, one of the major arcana was called the Papist. The name was eventually changed to the High Priestess, but she still wears a papal crown. As another example, the Ace of Cups has a dove carrying sacramental bread. The Thoth deck is based on the Rider deck, but with updates and addition by Aleister Crowley in the 20th century. There is a different scope of symbolism in the Thoth deck, and Crowley switched around the order of some of the major arcana. I could do an entire episode on Crowley. Maybe I will. Who knows? There is a lot more occultism and leaning into a couple more Jewish elements in the Thoth deck than there is in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Tarot decks are pretty accessible today. I bought my deck at Barnes & Noble. Many of the big 3 tarot decks that are decorated in certain themes are also available. For example, I saw, when I was at Barnes & Noble buying a tarot card deck for the first time, I also saw one themed after the TV show Supernatural. Most tarot decks have 78 cards. Like regular playing cards, there are 4 suits. There's the cups, the wands, the swords, and the pentacles, which are sometimes called coins. They go from ace through 10, and then there are 4 face cards, the page, the knight, the queen, and the king. So far, 56 cards. There are 22 major arcana, numbered 0 through 21, which do not have any suits. These are the trump cards, considered more general but slightly stronger than the suits. If using the deck as a playing card deck, the trump cards would obviously be trumps. Modern tarot decks aren't really meant for card playing, though. So the major arcana are the Fool is number 0, number 1 is the Magician, 2 is the High Priestess, 3 is the Empress, 4 is the Emperor, 5 is the Hierophant, 6 is the Lovers, 7 is the Chariot, 8 is Strength, 9 is the Hermit, 10 is the Wheel of Fortune, 11 is Justice, 12 is the Hanged Man, 13 is Death, 14 is Temperance, 15 is the Devil, 16 is the tower, 17 is the star, 18 is the moon, 19 is the sun, 20 is the judgment or the last judgment, and 21 is the world. Often, one can do a reading just by shuffling the major arcana. If one wants more detail, one should use the full deck. Each card has a specific meaning when dealt during a tarot reading, both right side up and upside down. This goes for both the trump cards and the suits, the minor arcana. Take the Lovers, for example. Right side up with the text at the bottom, the Lovers are all about love and attraction and beauty. Reversed, when it's dealt upside down with the heads facing the diviner as opposed to the feet, at least in the case of the Lovers, it means that the relationships are foiled, things are failing, there's a lot of contradictions. Another option, number 21, the World. Right side up, the world represents voyaging, changing place, or assured success in one's endeavors. Reversed, it means stagnation, inertia, permanence. There is a similar meaning behind number 13, death. Now this isn't a literal death, it's more metaphorical. It represents the end of an era. It is a form of destruction. Sometimes it's the loss of fortune. Some decks call it the death rebirth card. It's the death of one version of oneself to make way for a new one. Reversed, number 13 is similar to the world reversed. Lethargy, sleepwalking, hope destroyed. From what I can tell, readings are not meant to be super specific or only specific in retrospect. It's not meant to be in 51 hours and 12 minutes you will have a fall and you will break your neck and then you will be in the hospital for 17 days. It's not even meant to be, you should absolutely marry this person. You should definitely take this job for sure. You should for sure make this move. It's meant to be more general. If you marry this person, these kinds of things will come up. If you take this job, you may encounter these vibes. Then, if you do not want those things or those vibes in your life, you can make your decisions accordingly. I've seen some interpretations, mostly on Pinterest, that indicate that the suits have some indication of time frames. Wands are days, swords are weeks, cups are months, pentacles are years. These are correlated to the relevant elements. Wands are fire, swords are earth, cups are water, pentacles are air. I don't know if it's meant to be super specific. The Three of Wands would not necessarily mean something will happen in 3 days, for example. Someone who can elaborate on that, I would appreciate it. Send an email. And just to make sure that this does not turn into the whole episode on tarot, time for some quick fire terms, and then one kind of divination that has a really super ancient connection. Osteomancy is the use of bones in divination. Hopefully they belong to a being already dead. Palmistry is reading the lines in the palm in order to divine one's future. This is also called chiromancy. Scatomancy is divination by poop, because, of course, someone thought of that. Theromancy is a class of divination based on animal behavior, from snakes to spiders to rodents to fish. There are specific names based on which animals you're trying to divine with, but theromancy is the overarching name for it. Stolistomancy is divination based on fashion. I could not find how that works exactly, so take it with the requisite grains of salt. Or write in. Astrology deserves its own episode because there are so many variations based on continent, let alone country and region, but I cannot mention divination without at least mentioning astrology, which is looking to the stars and planetary positions to divine one's future. As alluded to before, cartomancy is the divination of the future using cards. Tarot falls into this category. Cartomancy, among several other types of divination, like those by dice and by runes, falls under a category called claromancy. With claromancy, an outcome is derived by a method that would result in something otherwise random. It is in this randomness that the significance is found. You cannot control 100% how the dice or the lots will fall, for example. You cannot know for sure which rune you'll pull out of a bag until it is actually in your hand, and you're supposed to cut and shuffle the tarot deck several times in order to completely mix the deck up and almost ensure the randomness. One interesting method of cleromancy is called I Ching divination, and it legitimately has some connections to ancient cultures, Chinese to be specific. See, there's this text called the I Ching, which is comprised of 64 hexagrams. These hexagrams have different combinations of solid and broken lines, yin and yin. The hexagram lines are also marked with an X or an O to signify age or youth, depending on the placement. The methods by which the hexagrams are set up depends a lot on the person doing the divination. Using coins and euro stocks are the most common ones that I saw. But I Ching is the descendant of one of the oldest forms of fortune-telling, called plastromancy. The plastron is the undershell of a turtle. Heat would be applied to a piece of the turtle shell, and the divination would be performed on the resulting cracks. Sometimes those interpretations would be inscribed, and, well, that's the earliest version we have of Chinese writing, dating from as early as the 14th century BCE to possibly the 11th century BCE. There are shells found in burial sites with these marks, dating back to 4000 and 3000 BC. So, even earlier. Even cooler, the writing has striking similarities to modern Chinese scripts, which is absolutely wild to me. More than 5,000 years and only minimal changes. English speakers can hardly understand Shakespeare nowadays, and that's considered modern English. Old English and modern English are mutually unintelligible across a little over 1,000 years. The fact that it's hardly changed over the course of several thousand is wild. But thank you for joining me tonight. If you have any opinions on what I should cover next in terms of divination, if you have any better answers as to questions I posed, please write in drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, join us on Patreon starting at $3 a month. You'll get to vote on polls and occasional extra episodes. If you want consistent extra episodes, you can start at $10 a month. And Dreary Midnight Podcast is now on Instagram, Dreary Midnight Pod, over there. And with all that said, have your cards with you. Make sure any osteomancy is performed on beings that are actually dead, and safe travels home on this dreary midnight. Good night.